agus fáilte arás to the Crazy House Prices podcast with me, Ciarán Mulqueen. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode and all the really good feedback. Somehow managed to get up to number 11 in Spotify charts for Ireland. I'm hoping to get into the top 10 after this one. So in today's podcast, I'm going to chat to you about our retrofit costs for our house. Give you some figures because I know you're all really interested in that, and then towards the end then I will give you my thoughts on this new first home shared equity scheme thing, because a lot of you have been asking me on my thoughts on that, and I won't bore you any further, so let's get straight into it. So let's talk about our retrofit. So basically we have a 100-year-old house. It is semi-detached. That means it has 3 external walls. That's important because a lot of the grants are dependent on how many external walls you have, whether you're terraced, semi-detached or detached. And if, like me, you weren't really sure as to what all this kind of stuff means, an external wall is essentially a wall where on the other side is the outside. So on a semi-detached we have 3 external walls because the other wall is shared with your neighbour. So on the other side of that is in your neighbour's house. So another way of thinking of it is any walls that have windows, they're all external walls. So that's important because when it comes to insulation and stuff. So I got a load of questions in on this, so I'm just going to answer them kind of as I talk about what we did. But I'm going to give you the prices, updated prices for July. In terms of what everything costs and what the grants are, because these things kind of change quite a lot. The grants have recently changed, as obviously prices have changed as well. They're going up. I'll talk about a few issues with the retrofit scheme with the SEAI and basically how we paid for it all. So it took us, I started ripping out the house around October, and we should hopefully be moving in next Friday. So it took us a fairly long time. That wasn't because of the retrofit company, that was just because we were kind of project managing a lot of it ourselves, and these things take time and we didn't have a whole lot of money to just pay for everything up front. So it took quite a while really, but I think how long it takes will depend on how much money you have essentially. So a few talking points on this is going to be the price of everything and can you do it DIY. So basically you can't DIY this if you're looking to get SEAI grants, because you have to use an SEAI registered tradesperson, so you can't DIY it. That's not to say that if you were fairly handy you couldn't do it yourself for cheaper anyway, but you just won't be able to get the grants because it has to be done by somebody who's registered with the SEAI. Now, to be fair, for the work we did, I wouldn't be confident doing a lot of it myself. Or any of it. Maybe the attic you might be able to do yourself, but if you're a lot handier than me, you might be able to do some of the insulation. But I would advise against it, to be honest, unless you're fairly handy. We used a one-stop shop. They're called EnviroBead, and Fergal looked after it all for us. The difference between using a one-stop shop and getting individual grants is there are kind of extra grants if you use a one-stop shop. For example, you get a bonus for reaching a B2, a grant with a heat pump, a grant of around $2,000. The one-stop shops will only do it with a heat pump, so you can't get a combi boiler or any of that kind of stuff. And the other difference with the one-stop shops and doing individual grants is if you use a one-stop shop, you don't pay for it all up front and then wait for the grant money to come in, whereas you do with individual grants. So let's say you just wanted to get solar panels. You have to pay for them all up front and then you have to apply for the grant. So the difference with the one-stop shop is you kind of pay them a bit at the start, a bit at the middle and a bit at the end, and it just makes it a little bit easier, and then they also project manage it for you. So it is extremely expensive. I will talk at the end about some of my issues with the SEI stuff. I think it's a great idea. I just think, it's poorly executed at the moment with the way everything costs so much money. So other things like people ask me were about payback and solar and what have you. So basically I'll run through the cost now of what we did, right? So our heat pump, you're looking at around 13 to 14 and a half grand for a heat pump, and you get a €6,500 grant on that. For radiators, you're looking at around €3,000 for 6 to 7 radiators, and you get a €2,000 grant on that. You can get external insulation or internal insulation. We went for internal insulation because we've red brick on the outside, and plus external was crazy money. We have about 100 square meters of wall to insulate, and that was €18,000, and you only get a €3,500 grant on that. So the insulation is massive. Now, it makes a huge difference in terms of the heat retention in the house, but it's huge money. You can you can do an external wrap kind of the house as well. That's around €20 a square meter, and the internal insulation around €18 a square meter. To insulate your attic, or our attic anyway, it's €1,000, but you get a €1,300 grant on that. So I don't know how that works out, but you make €300 on the attic. The attic makes a massive difference to the heat retention in the house as well, because you lose a huge amount of your heat through the attic, through the roof, and through the walls and through doors. Then mechanical ventilation is €4,000 to €6,000, and the grant on that is only about €1,200. I haven't got that one written down if the grant's down for everything else, but the vents, I couldn't find a grant on that. And then our solar panels for a 2 kilowatt system was €5,500, or a 3 kilowatt was €6,500, and you only get about a €900 grant on that. Our windows were €13,500, and we got a €3,000 grant on that, and €800 for each external door. We've 2 external doors, so that's another €1,600 grant. And then our bonus for reaching a minimum of a B2 with the heat pump was a €2,000 grant. So adding all those up for you, these are the figures you're going to want to hear. Adding all that up, it's €72,800, and the grants come in at around €12,600. So you're looking at an overall cost of €60,200. That's not including VAT at 13.5%, plus a 7% project management fee as well, which there is a grant for as well. But it's extremely expensive, and it's not doable for most people. Like, we had to get a credit union loan out to pay for it, which is absolutely killing me, because you're paying 6.5%. I think we're paying 6.5 or 7% on that credit union loan. So like, it's tanking my wages every 2 weeks. So I got the loan with Cowerlin Credit Union. That's the primary school teachers credit union. So it comes out of my pay. So it comes out of my paycheck. So I'm just like basically not getting paid anything every 2 weeks after we pay the mortgage and the bills and all that. But I think the way to look at this is, like, a lot of people ask about payback on solar. The payback on the solar, when you get an energy, you get the energy report, and then for the solar, a guy came out to kind of, check out the house, and you get a report on that, and it gives you the payback period. But also energy prices are going up and up, so your payback period will be less on the solar. But you also need to take into account, let's say you're getting a loan out for this, but you're also going to save money if you switch to a green rate mortgage, and you're going to save money on the running costs of the house. But to be honest, most of the stuff we didn't really do with kind of money in mind. We did it more so with, a more ethical and sustainable decision, and to try and use less energy. Like, so we've no gas in the house at all, so it was more just an environmental thing for a lot of it, and just doing it now while we could, because we didn't have to live in the house. That's another question that got sent in, like, could you do it while living in the house? We wouldn't have been able to anyway. Maybe you could, but I mean, it would be really tough to do a complete gut of a house and live in it at the same time. We're lucky that we can live in Melissa's parents' house. So we didn't go for radiators. We didn't go for underfloor heating. We went for radiators. Underfloor, we would have loved underfloor heating, but we would have had to underpin the house, which is another kind of 10 grand, which you obviously don't have. So we didn't opt for underfloor heating. We just went with radiators. You don't lose much heat through the floor. It's the least of your worries, really. So if you want underfloor heating, by all means go ahead and get it. But I don't know if it's worth it in terms of, looking at grants or whatever, or looking at heat retention. It's just nice to have. And then also it means you've no radiators on the walls, so you've a bit more to play with when it comes to furniture and stuff. You don't have to worry about where radiators are. The main question we got in was, like, is it worth it? For the money it costs, probably is. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we went from an F rating up to an A3, and if that's costing 60,000 plus VAT, so let's say that's costing around 70 grand, like, does it add 70 grand in value to the house? Like, I would argue it does. I don't know. We have to get the house revalued for the mortgage, so we'll find out then. But like, we essentially now have a brand new house that has a heat pump and solar panels and all the rest. So it probably is worth it in terms of the value of the house. Now, we're not looking to sell or anything. We're hoping to be able to live in this house forever. So it's more just how much is it going to cost us to run every month, and it's better for the environment. So I think we'll know a little bit more about how much it costs to run when we're living there properly. But for the moment, I don't really know. But I think it's worth it because it's better for the environment. But anyway, next, like, is it a percentage, or are there set grants? So it used to be with the one-stop shop, it used to be a percentage of the overall thing. Now they are set grants, and if you have a look at my heat pumps post on my page, or the SCAI website is really good, and that basically gives you the list of all the grants for everything. I just listed the ones that we used. Next question in was, did we go over budget? We actually didn't. In fact, we ended up paying less than the original quote, because in the original quote we were quoted for pumping the cavities. So basically some houses are built with these cavity blocks with a little space in between them, and when they say pumping them, it's essentially this little thing that you drill a hole in and you pump, and they pump in styrofoam in between the blocks, and that acts as like an insulation barrier. It's quite cheap to get done. I think it's only a few grand, and it makes a big difference. So we didn't know that was already done in the house. So when we got our assessment, we weren't sure. But then I was kind of looking at the walls, and you can see where the holes were. And then once we started tearing down the back wall, we could see all of the beads coming out. So I was like, oh wait, this is already pumped. So we saved a few quid on that, and we saved money on the ventilation. So because our house is so small, it's only 90 square meters. So because we saved, because it's so small, we didn't need the heat recovery system or demand controlled ventilator or whatever it is. There's an expensive one. We only had to get a cheap one. So basically we just have fancier vents than most houses have. They have a little moisture strip, and depending on how much heat is in the air, they open and close and all the rest. So that's pretty much how that works. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know 100% how it all works, but it's handy, and then it just means you're not losing loads of air out when you don't need to. We didn't go over budget in the whole renovation with the build and with the retrofit. We actually stayed within budget. We added stuff on as it went, little bits here and there. So we went over it in that aspect, but that was because we chose to, so it didn't actually go over budget, and that's mainly down to just working really well with Fergal of Envirobead, and then my builder Kev. You'll see him on my Instagram. He's Gormanston Woodcraft. He's a friend of mine, and I've known him since I'm 4 years of age. Same with my electrician. I've known him since I'm about 6 or 7. So they're friends of mine, and I think that's the main reason why we didn't go over budget, is because they didn't try and fleece me basically. And even Kev didn't put up his prices as material prices went up, and they kind of stayed relatively the same. So I'm very fortunate in that aspect that I have friends that did most of the work, and Fergal and Envirobead was good to us as well. So we didn't go over budget in that, but like, I have friends that are doing work at the moment and prices are going through the roof. So you really just have to have a good kind of relationship with your builder. In terms of ripping out the old system, we did a lot of that. I did a lot of the stripping out of the ceilings and all of that, and then Kev took out a lot of the old copper. So when you're getting a heat pump, you will most likely need an entire new heating system, because the radiators don't work like old radiators do. They actually work off a lower temperature. So chances are you will need a whole new heating system. So we ripped out all the old copper, and you replaced it with kind of more modern stuff, and then you can scrap the old copper. Is worth a lot of money. So if you're getting work done, don't let the contractors take the copper away. They will try and take the copper away, but don't let them do it, because it's worth a fortune. Like I think we got about 350, 400 euro in the scrap place at Harold's Cross Bridge for the copper. And had we driven 20 minutes outside of the city, we'd have gotten even more, but we just weren't arsed. So don't let them take the copper away. There's a little tip for you. So basically you kind of need to, when it comes to factoring in the house hunting, so like ours is, you're looking at around 70 grand, and ours is 90 square meters. So it worked out in around €7 a square meter, or €700 a square meter just for the retrofit. And then you've the renovation on top of that as well. So I mean, when you're shopping around for a house and you think it needs to be entirely completely gutted and redone, like, you really need to be factoring in probably in and around 1,500 to 2,000 euro a square meter to basically bring it up to an A-rated house. And I do think you can probably bring pretty much any house up to an A-rated house. If our house can do it, I'd say any house can. So that's a lot of money, you know. So you need to factor that in when you're house hunting or whatever, if you can afford it, basically. And then in terms of to achieve the grants, if you're going for individual grants, you don't need to achieve any specific BR rating. But as I said, individual grants you pay up front, and then you do it yourself and you have to use an SEAI registered contractor. But if you're using a one-stop shop, you need to hit at least a B2 to get the grants, and you get an extra $2,000 grant when you do that as well. And then someone else asked, did we go for a combi or a heat pump? And did we ever consider not using a heat pump? Yeah, like we considered using a combi boiler, but then the one-stop shop only works with a heat pump. They don't install combi boilers. And then also I was just more so thinking of in terms of future-proofing the house. Do I want to put a combi boiler in now and then be redundant in 10 years and everybody's moving towards heat pumps? So figured it was just a good idea to go the whole hog and put the heat pump in now rather than try and replace it. So that's kind of what we did. Again, our house is only 91 square meters, I think, and you're looking at 60,000 pretty much plus VAT on top of that. So that's just for the retrofit stuff, not including all the build work that we did. So it's a huge amount of money. In terms of DIY, so let's say you just want to increase the energy rating of your house, you probably could DIY some things. Like the attic, I think most people will be able to handle that. So basically put in 300 mil of insulation. So I've never done it before, but I watched when the lads did it, and you fill in between the rafters with one layer of 150 mil going the way of the rafters, and then you put another layer on top of that perpendicular to it of 150 mil, so it ends up being 300 mil. There's a bit of cutting involved. It's messy. It's warm up there. It's hot. It's hard work. It is doable. It's not massively it's not a huge job, and depending how big your attic is, you probably could do it yourself. Another thing, if you're fairly handy, you might be able to do would be the internal wall insulation. You could probably, so we used, I think it was 65 mil board. So it's basically like 10 mils of plasterboard and then 65 mils of insulation behind it. And then on the back wall, we used 100 mil just because we have a steel pole there. So it's just to keep the back wall level. So the back wall is even more insulated. But you could probably do that yourself. It basically just goes onto your existing wall. You don't even really need to do much to the wall. So it makes it really handy in terms of it's cheaper then to skim the wall because they're working off a lovely flat surface rather than having to fix what was there beforehand and wallpaper and what have you. Now, if you're fairly handy, you could probably do that yourself. But the main thing is, if you just want to improve the energy rating of your house yourself and you're not worried about grants, well then you need to keep the spec sheet. So keep your receipts and keep the spec sheet of what you use, because you'll need to show that to the BER assessor to say, look, this is what we have on the walls, this is what we put in the attic. So you need to keep the spec sheet and the U values and all of that to show them. Otherwise, the BER assessor will go in and they'll just go off standard kind of specs, and you may not get as high as you should in terms of your energy rating. So I guess if you want to use the grants, you have to use SEAI people. If you want to DIY it, you won't get any grants, but it might be a lot cheaper than using someone who's SEAI registered. So I guess the takeaway is it's extremely expensive. I believe the government should be providing 0% loans on this. So imagine if you were able to spread that 60 grand out over 15 years at 0%, it then becomes really affordable for people, because you might be paying, say, 350, 400 euro a month, but you may be saving half of that, if not more, on running costs of the house plus a cheaper mortgage rate, because you can now get an A rating. So if the government are really serious about this, that's what they should be putting money into, not this silly first home scale. I'll talk about that later on, but it's that's where they could be putting money in, and then it's not even costing anything because they get that money back just at 0%. As I said, our quote was actually more expensive than what we paid in the end, because there were a couple of things done to the house that we weren't sure of in terms of the beads or the pumped cavities, and then we didn't need the fancier ventilation system, we just needed a standard one. But yeah, you're looking, as I said, around 60 grand plus VAT for the rest of it. Now, a lot of you have been messaging me, asking me about my thoughts on this new first home incentive, or the shared equity scheme that the government announced the other day. Now, look, you're probably all fed up as well. I am more fed up than anybody of just being so negative about everything to do with the housing market. It's really tough. I'm not generally a negative person. I'm usually quite positive, but I really wish I could be more positive about these things, but I just can't. It's just a terrible idea, I think. And that's not just my opinion. I mean, the ESRI and all the like expert economists said this is not a good idea. This will drive prices up. Basically, it's 400 million I know they're putting in. So that, like, it's small in the grand scheme of the total housing market and the billions that it is every year. So it's not a huge thing. So I don't think it's going to have a massive impact in terms. It's not going to drive up the price of everything, and it will help a few people. But what it will do is it will give that it's only available for first time buyers, and it's only available on new homes. So what that's going to do is going to basically increase the debt burden of that first time buyer. I know the interest rates are low after 5 years and what have you, but it's still extra money that they have to pay back. And it's only on new builds. So like, what do you think is going to happen? So there are price caps in place for the scheme. So let's say, I think it's 500,000 for a new build in Dublin City. First of all, find me a new build house in Dublin City for 500 grand. They don't exist. But second of all, do you not think in areas where they have these price caps, let's say there's one for 350 grand and the developer has that house up for sale for 320 grand yesterday. This scheme is announced. What do you think is going to happen? That house is now going to be 350 grand. They're going to add that 30 grand on because they know people can now get the money off the government to pay for it. So like, that has already happened. Somebody sent me a message yesterday where there was new houses being advertised and the price is now taken down and it's changed to POA, which is like price on application, basically saying how much have you got. So they're just going to put the prices up. The developer, that's what they do. Like, this is essentially another transfer of taxpayers' money into developers. It's not going to stimulate any more house building. It's a demand side scheme, and I say this all, I'm like a broken record, but we need supply side schemes, not demand side schemes. But it's also showing that first time buyers, it's only for first time buyers, it's only for new builds. So if you're a second time buyer, if you've been through a divorce, if you've owned a property elsewhere, if you're trying to move back home to Ireland, this is no good for you. If you can even find a new build. So I don't think they should be putting incentives on demand side. I don't think they should be putting incentives on second hand houses either, because it will just drive the prices up of them as well. But it's just, I guess, a box ticking exercise. But it's showing you that first time buyers need now not just one but two government grant schemes to try and buy a home. Like, that is a huge problem, that you need the Help to Buy scheme and now this first home shared equity scheme just to buy a house. Like, that's crazy. It's such a waste of money. It's just literally transferring money straight to developers who are wealthy enough as it is. They don't need any more money. And it's just, I just don't think it's a good idea. Again, I wish I could be more positive, but I do think it's just a box ticking exercise. I think that 400 million could be much better spent. As I said earlier, the retrofit scheme. So let's say pump some money into that. Pump money into, give people 0% loans so they can fix up their houses and get them up to a more energy efficient house. Like, you could use that fund to CPO properties and let the government be the developer themselves. So I put a tweet up yesterday about these houses on all these big buildings on Ainger Street and Killian Woods. Like, literally, I woke up then this morning and Killian Woods had done a whole research thing on it. So it turns out they're owned by this like multi-million euro UK company, investment company, property investors who own it. They bought it for 600 grand and it's just left sitting there to be derelict. So maybe this is a bit too radical, but like, wouldn't it be great if the government could say, okay, right, these are foreign investment owners, they're not really contributing anything, they got planning, they didn't do anything with it, so let's CPO it and take it off them, give them what they paid for it. So 600 grand plus VAT is all they paid for it, so give them that and then pump some money into turning them into homes. And whether that's social housing, or I think a good idea could be for the government to become the developer and actually build homes at cost plus a little bit of profit. So let's say because if like developers don't actually build anything, they don't put a shovel in the ground, they hire out contractors, and that's what the government can do as well. And then say retrofit all those old buildings on Ainger Street, turn them into homes and sell them. And because you could sell them up front, so there'd be no capital requirement really from the government, because people will buy them off plans and add in a 5 or 10% profit, and then put that money and that profit into the next scheme and into the next scheme. And like, I don't know, maybe that's too simple, maybe it's too radical. To me, it makes a massive amount of sense, because people are desperate for homes. People will buy homes off plans, especially if they know they're government built. Like, there's a reason why all the ex-council houses are some of the most in demand in Dublin, because they're really well built. Even though some of them are 150, 70 years old, they're really well built. They're made of bricks rather than plasterboard and wood, and like that's why the value has gone up on them so much, because they're well built. People, like, you know, you can they have a good opinion of council built homes. Like, they're usually really well built. So I don't understand why the government can't do that. Maybe it's a bit too simple or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, they are my thoughts on the first home scheme or shared equity scheme or whatever it's called. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. As always, huge thank you to my patrons. If you head over to patreon.com/crazyhouseprices, there is loads of content over there, extra podcasts with experts. I do Q&As over there, lots of stuff, but it's also just a way to support the page and support this podcast and keep it all going. So patreon.com/crazyhouseprices. And as always, massive thank you to my patrons. Without you guys, I wouldn't have been able to keep this thing going as long as I have. So really appreciate it, and thank you all for listening, and have a great week.